part of the main Aloha system. Some of them require a little bit configuration other than the way that you currently have them set up. So in a moment, we're going to look at some different sales reports, some labor reports, and some other things that you can use for your staff. First of all, I want to start with going through some staffing levels and looking at your sales volume, both by hour and day. And the idea here is a lot of restaurants have a reason that they schedule things, and oftentimes that's just tradition. Because we've always had a schedule, we've always scheduled somebody to work 11 to 7, or we've always scheduled somebody to come in and work 10 to 4. What we want to look here is making sure that we have not only adequate staffing levels, but also the right people in the right position. So as we look through these things, we're not scheduling 2 people to work on a lunch when we have only $500 in sales projected and one server who handles, $1,200 in their shift, or vice versa. We're not scheduling one person who can only handle $500 for a $700 lunch. Overall, besides having the obvious benefits of controlling labor and guest satisfaction, there's also some additional ancillary benefits about staffing and turnover. So making sure that our staff is having a fluid opportunity for them to suggestively sell, make good tips, and everything else helps reduce our turnover rates as well, and helps increase all the way around the satisfaction and the levels of stress, not just on the hourly staff, but the managers as well. So when we're going to come here through and look first, we're going to take a look at something that we use for projecting our labor and seeing where we need to be. And so what we're going to do is we're going to the point of sale, employees, and the labor report. And we've looked at this before. We get the pop-up here where we have our labor report settings. We can choose a range of dates. We can choose our individual employees. And on a day-to-day basis, you're going to be using this report frequently to go ahead and run payroll. Make sure that your payroll was correct on previous days. Make sure that everybody's declaring the proper tips and everything else. But in this case, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and choose this arrow here to flip down and create a new one. And we can either start with one that's not in use. You typically have default 1, 2, and 3 set up already for your basic, and usually number 1 is configured for how labor is going to be. We can either go down to 3, or we could go ahead and hit add and create an additional one. But once we do that, if we hit settings, you're going to get this pop-up here on the right. And so this pop-up on the right is how we choose the individual lines that are set up in the labor report. But what we want to do is we want to get rid of all of the detail of this. We just want to see the big picture. So what we're interested really here in doing is viewing the job code. So the key fields here on the left, we want job code, and we want to sort these by job code. And then other than that, we're only looking for a summary section. And what we're looking for is within each job code, we want a summary of how many employees worked regular hours in each job code, overtime, and total pay for that. If we run this report, what we're going to get here is just a brief half-page paper that looks like this. And so our idea here is that we can keep this number in mind. And traditionally, when we start running our labor reports for a site, we usually start going day over day, and then we go week over week. And then eventually, once we have 1 year running history, you'll be able to go back and do same week previous year. And the reason I say same week, not same day, is because we're looking at things to slightly adjust. So if it's Memorial Day weekend, we want to make sure we're comparing that to Memorial Day weekend on the previous month or the previous year, not just the second week or the third week. So when we do this, you see we can get here, for instance, we'll take a look at the bar for a moment. We can see here that we had 29 hours scheduled. So between knowing that we had 29 scheduled regular hours and we ended up having to do some overtime, maybe that was because of an event, but what we want to look at is then, okay, can we schedule the total of this hours all as regular and not have to pay the overtime? Or can we make sure that in order to get our projected labor here, kitchen, if our sales are running 10% down, then we want to make sure that not only is our total pay for that period below, but in order to stay on track, maybe we want to make sure we're spending less, 1096 and 10% less of that when we look at our budget. So now that we know what our on that pay period last time is, we can compare this against our shift notes that we had. So if we know that we had this much labor invested in that same week or that same day, well, great, but did we also have a notes left over from we were terribly underserviced on that day? 3 servers called off, so these numbers are greatly skewed. So we can go ahead and adjust them before we do that, or we can go the other way. Everything went wonderful, and these are great targets to go on. But looking back at our shift notes, and if we're using a manager's red book, we may have notes in there about the weather. We can go ahead and take these as a starting point. So when we go back into the basic labor scheduler in Aloha, we touched on this very briefly on Tuesday about how the basic labor scheduler can be used to go ahead and schedule things. This is a little bit blown up and a little more detail on it. So what we want to use here is those numbers in comparison for this. So once we have everybody's job codes and their pay rates entered, adding a job code in here is as simple as just dragging it And then if that employee calls off, these whole bars of shifts can actually just be drugged down to the new employee who's covering that shift and working it. As we fill these in, because it knows everybody's pay rate, you can see an immediate effect on what it's going to do on your payroll by just dragging it from one employee to another. If Jared is my highest scheduled cook right here, and I don't want to schedule him on a Monday night where the labor or the sales volume that we're doing can't support that kind of labor investment. If he's my highest paid cook, he's probably my strongest cook, and I want to make sure I'm scheduling him on a Friday or Saturday where my sales volume for that day justifies that effort. And just by taking his shift on a Monday and moving it from Jared down to Juan, I can immediately see the effect it's going to have on my labor percentages for the week. So making sure that we've got the right people on the right shifts, getting an immediate feedback of it, and we kind of have a running idea where we're going here on total hours. And on top of that, we'll be able to do a check from this, having the schedules in, and see if we have anybody scheduled for an overtime. So there's a bunch of ancillary benefits for this, the heads up, making sure that we're not scheduling things, but it also gives us a footnote of where we actually are in our scheduling. Now, if you want to print these schedules for your staff, you can actually in the settings for this print the schedules by a different sheet for every page. So bartenders are on one page, cooks are on another page, hosts are on another page. So you can go ahead and post those in the appropriate section. But there's also a selection in here where we can print these without. When you go to print it, it asks, do you want to print out times? Most of the time in the restaurant industry, we'll have you not print them without times. So you can go ahead and budget on a Friday if you think you may be extra busy or you've been having trouble getting people out here, or if you have cleaning projects going on and things, you can feel free to go ahead and extend those out times back if necessary. But what's only showing on the schedule for your employees to see is their in times. So you don't have to worry about a staff member saying, well, I was only scheduled 4 to 9, it's 9 o'clock and I'm going to leave, and you still have a full establishment. We can go ahead and hide that value. They just know that they're in 4 o'clock and they can guess when they're going to go ahead and be cut. Okay, so we're not stepping on your toes for your scheduling controls that way. So we can use this to go ahead and start reaching actual numbers and targeting and actually working within our budget to make sure that our profit and loss statement is in line here. Then we can also go ahead here and compare our servers for our hourly sales and labor. So if we go up to reports, point of sale, sales, and hourly sales and labor report, you have the ability here to run either the weekly or the summary section for the hourly sales and labor report. When you do that, you're going to get the option to choose the increment that you want to look at. Now, most people will go ahead and, at least as a starting point, view this in an hourly return, especially if you have extended hours or your hours aren't flexible. If you have the ability to change your hourly times, you may want to break these down to half-hour increments. Usually hourly is standard enough for looking at your business and deciding maybe we should close early on Mondays. We can close at 9 o'clock, or maybe now that the winter weather has changed and the daylight savings has ended, maybe it's time to go ahead and change our hours of operation. And this will help us do that. But if we break it down to the 15-minute increments, we can also make that decision about, well, we traditionally have our wait staff come in at 5 o'clock for the dinner rush, but we can see that we really don't have any sales volume that accrues until 5:45. So at the bare minimum, I can have most of my staff pushed back till 5:30, so I can save at least a half hour labor on every shift. So we can take a look at these, and it runs a report that's like this. So there's a lot of information here. We're looking at our net sales, our labor hours, and so forth. You can see we've got every day of the week as well as our running total, so it gives us kind of an aggregate time for what we're using. And if we hit the arrows here on this, the bottom, we've got double arrows. The double arrows are going to take us to the last page of the sales report. So the last page of this, if we look, I'm going to zoom in here and we'll kind of look at this. You can see here, looking at Monday, for the 4 o'clock hour, I had $165 in sales. And then there's where my volume picks up. Suddenly I'm doing about $1,000 an hour from 5 o'clock on, 6 o'clock, almost there at 7. And then 8 o'clock hours when I start to dip here. So we kind of have an idea on where we're going to start bringing people in. I'll probably only have one server in here at 4 o'clock, but I may start pulling everyone else in about 4:45. And again, here I can use this to have an accurate estimation of what time I'm going to be sending people home when I'm doing that budgeting and that forecasting as well. So even though I've got those end times hidden for my staff, I can go ahead and say, okay, well, at this point, I probably should have 2 people on in that 8 o'clock hour. So at 8 o'clock, I'm going to cut the rest of them out, and I'm going to go ahead and schedule them back to probably 8:30, because that's about how long it's going to take them to get their side work done and clean up their sections. The remainder, I can look here, I only need one person from 9 o'clock on. Okay. So we can check when our hourly drop points are. We can also use this as an indicator of when we should be running our happy hours to increase our business during those hours, if our slow times are from 2 to 5 or 4 to 6, where we want to fit our happy hours, and also for marketing purposes, because a lot of times particular places that have more of a sports bar or a bar feel will do specials where we have, say, half price appetizers from 9 o'clock on. And that's just because we're trying to drive the incremental revenue during that time frame. So we can go ahead and worry about that. We can also do sales incentives in here with our staff. So that may play into it too. Maybe we want to start doing late night appetizer sales or offer some special features in there. And we're going to talk a little bit about that when we get into the incentivizing for your staff as well. But this gives us our target timeframes for when we want to run those specials and run those incentives. The overtime report I mentioned already. But just to touch base on it again, this is where it already has that information. So now we can look at those overtime and make sure that we're using them on days where the volume is supported on that, and we have everybody's schedule with their pay rates in. So on the flip side of that, when we look at the purchasing side, there's another way that we can set up our product mix reports. And there's a concept in Aloha called categories. You can see it when we look at the product mix report here. This category is breakfast. So at some point, as each one of these items was added to the system, we had to tell that item what it is. And categories are used in Aloha to blanket define what an item is. So the system is fundamentally stupid. It doesn't know what a dessert is. It doesn't know what an omelet is. It doesn't know these types of things. So when we create a category, the categories are the process by which we define terms in Aloha. So then we can refer to them as a group later. And what we're looking at here is how we're going to use these to free up capital to do some menu maximizing and some reducing some waste here in general. If we come back into the maintenance set portion and we go to menu categories, this is where we create our additional categories. And you're going to have quite a few categories set up by default in the system, both sale and non-sale. So you can see here looking at this one, we're looking at a category called all items. And this is probably one of our most important categories. Every item, when we create it, gets added to a category that's a sales category, and every item can be in one and only one sales category. So these are when they appear in your actual reporting, your sales report. It says in there how much food did you sell, how much liquor did you sell, how much retail did you sell. Every product falls into one and only one of those. If you held it up and said, which one is this? That's the answer you would give. Any item can be in more than one general categories. So general categories are what we call the arbitrary designations that we're making. So if I'm going to later set up a promo or a coupon that applies only to desserts, what I do is I create a category called desserts, and every item I throw into that category, the system now knows is a dessert. And I can say that category, that coupon only applies to desserts. So we know it only applies to those items that are in that group. So when we do that, you can go over here to this side and you can see that there's a pull down arrow that lets us pull down and see all the lists of categories that we have. And it's either going to be general or sales in this part right here. So when we do that, you can see here in this system I've had set up all items as my original category, beef and sausage, hot dogs, and these are all sales categories. So the actual items I'm selling are going to appear on the sales report as burgers and chicken, $500, salads, $300, and so forth. Oftentimes you'll see in a system this gets lumped together just to be a category called food sales, and then liquor, beer, and wine get lumped together, or those are broken apart. So you'll have food, liquor, beer, wine. The all items category is the one that we use for your comps in your system. So if I were going to do a comp for a customer, in theory, customers can be unhappy about any item that your establishment is selling. They can be upset about it because the service was terrible, because the product wasn't good, or it wasn't what they expected, or it fell, it got dropped, any reason that you may need to comp an item. So all of our general comps that we do, the comps that are customer satisfaction comps, like manager's dollar discount or manager percentage discount, every time we apply a comp, it looks at a list and says, am I allowed to comp this item? So for those categories, we have them check against a category called all items. So they are allowed to comp all items. So whenever we add an item, in addition to it being put in a sales category when we create the item, then we're also going to assign it to a general category called all items. Beyond that, we can put it in as many other categories as we want. And the reason this is important, when we create the category here, we would choose general. And some examples of this on why it would be in multiple categories is maybe I want to create a category for everything that I'm going to go order from my bread vendor. So in that, I'm going to include every chicken sandwich I sell, every burger I sell, and so forth. So when I look and see my buns, I see these are all the products I sold that use buns. They're chicken, they're burgers, and they're a mix of all kinds of other sandwiches, but I have a total count of how many buns I need to order from my bread vendor. Maybe I also have a category that tells me how much product I should be ordering this week from my meat vendor, who's probably a different vendor. And I also want to include those burgers in that category as well. So I've got one category for buns, my burgers are in that, another category for meat, and my burgers are in that. Each item can appear in multiple ones. If I create a desserts category, once I've created it and labeled it as desserts, the second tab over here is the items. And so when we switch to the tabs column over here, here is a list of every item that is in the system. Okay, every item that we've created is on the left side here. Much like in the sales report where we have for settings, we have things that are available and then things that are included. We're going to, again, take all the items that are available to be put in that category, and we're going to move them over to included in that category. So I select all my desserts, and then I hit the right arrow here to go ahead and move them over to the right and put them into that category. And then I just remember to save it. And once I do that, I'm going to get a report that shows me on my product mix report, it will show this. Now, by default, your product mix report is going to show you both sales and non-sales categories. You can switch one of the two off by settings on product mix. You can see only your sales categories or only your non-sales categories. And this report gets used extremely creative. I see people use this to track what they want to use for the different vendors for sales categories, to check their product usage, to know how much meat should be on hand. I see people use this to establish baselines for steak counts. It also gets used for things like a lot of times people will allow their Bud rep to come in the cooler and tell them how much Budweiser they need and things. And you can spot check that conversation. Sure, the Budweiser rep is going to go into your cooler and he's going to say, great, I'm going to give you 24 cases of Bud. But while he's doing that, it only takes you 1 second to run the non-sales product mix report for your Budweiser vendor, and you can sit down with them and say, well, why would you give me 24 cases? I've only used 8 in the last week, and I don't have any special events coming up. That way you're not spending your liquid capital sitting on inventory to help pad the sales numbers for your Bud guy so he can make bonus this week. So we want to make sure that we're spending our money in the right area, and if we configure our product mix reports, those are going to go ahead and help us keep track of any product that we want to keep track of, not just looking at our total sales volume. So we can do this for incentives too. So once we create a category, we can refer to it in other scenarios as well. So we're going to come back with this because we're going to look at how we use categories to incentivize our servers and make sure that they're aware that we're tracking how they're doing and upselling and adding on. So we can take a look at your comparative server sales, and Aloha is already keeping track of these, some baselines for them, but there's some additional lines that we can establish for your servers as well. So we're going to look at this a couple different ways. Some places like to look at them with your gross sales, and some people like to look at them net sales. We're also going to do some looking at comparative sales. So comparative sales is we want to know things like sales per hour, or we want to know what percentage of their sales are getting desserts added on, or is upselling drinks. Appetizers are a big one that people tend to track a lot of, which servers are doing upsells for servers, for appetizers, for desserts, those ancillary, because they give us a check average and they can say, okay, well, I know that if this server is working, I'm going to get $14 per customer that comes in rather than $11 per server that comes in. Those servers that then we establish tend to have higher gross sales for themselves or higher net sales. Tend to have lower turnover. They tend to have higher income because as a percentage of their sales, they're having higher sales, so they have a higher tips as a percentage of sales. And then also they tend to make the best trainers. And looking at this objectively and looking at the numbers is significantly less biased than looking at it by saying, well, I know who my good servers are and I know who my strong staff members are. Oftentimes you'll find out that there's a surprising amount of servers who are quiet staff members, don't make waves, they just come in, they do their job, and they do it very, very well, and they go home. And just because they don't make a lot of waves, they don't spend a lot of time talking and being in the public eye of your managers does not mean that they are not strong and worthy of being trainers for you and effective salespeople. So when we look at these sales numbers for the staff, we're going to go under point of sale, sales, and then we want to scroll on down there and look at comparative employee sales. So the comparative employee sales report lets us choose two categories that we want to compare. So the base category is usually done against that all items category. So we're worried about seeing what percentage of their total sales we're going to monitor for a time period. So here's the total sales. And then here, for instance, I chose that desserts category we created. So I want to see from my servers who's doing what percentage of their sales against their total sales. And if we go ahead and take a look at this report, you can see here I started with this employee, John. Okay, and we can see here during a time frame, and this report, by the way, can get very, very long if you're doing it over a long time period. It's not going to show me every check of John's. It's going to show me every check of John's that has an impact on the sales report. So we can look in here and see here's his receipt numbers for what checks he had, and we can go through the entire report of everything he had. The summary section of this report is probably what we're more interested in. So if we go down here and look at John's totals and everyone else, you can see that we can see what their total items sold was that they had. And obviously some of these people are full-time and some of these people are part-time and some might have been a manager helping out. So we've got their base, but then we can look at our target section over here. So we can say that he had 33% or 33 items in our target category that were sold against the 4,700 in his base. So we look here and we can see, well, what percentage of categories are these folks selling their desserts in? 1%, 0.5%. And see, most of these people are barely touching on dessert sales. So if I know from looking at my food costs that my dessert sales, for instance, have a very high return, my cost on a cheesecake might be $1.32, but I'm selling it for $6, then for the incremental sales in my restaurant, that might be a category that is underutilized and really worthy of me pursuing to increase my sales in that category. So now we know that because we're looking here at our numbers and we can say, okay, this is a category we're barely scratching the surface on. So what we want to do is now we want to drive our servers into knowing, A, we're looking at this, we're watching that. And first of all, we find out that just by looking at those numbers, oftentimes just the fact that those numbers are being watched makes the server self-conscious about it. And they will go ahead and slightly increase their sales on it anyway. Okay, so now we're going to go a step further and say, how can we use that reporting to both motivate my staff as well as motivate them with no cost to myself? So what we can do here is we can start looking at what they're really doing. These are our options that we have to set it up. There's the straight sales. We can look at their sales per hour, their sales per guest check, their count of guest counts, and so forth here in it. This is, it seems very, I don't want to say it just seems limiting. It seems like we're looking at a finite set here, but when you realize that these are comparing categories against it in here, and we can create the categories, it basically leaves us to an almost infinite amount of things that we can track and let our servers know that we're watching. So if we go under maintenance first, okay, we're going to go to maintenance, labor, performance measures to set them up. Later, we're going to come back and we'll go to reports, labor performance measures in order to view the result of this. And one of the things I want to make you aware of is that the performance measures do not retroactively track. So if you're going to want to start tracking the server's behavior on something, you need to set the performance measure up now, and then that performance measure will appear from this point going forward. Okay, we can't go back and say what was the performance measure for the last 2 weeks. When we do this, when we set these performance measures up, they will appear on the server's information out front, both on the manager's screen when they go and view the shift reports. If they hit server sales, these performance measures will appear across the bottom of the screen. They can tap on each individual one and get a live update and see where they are in the course of the shift. And also, if you've let your servers see their server sales, the servers will be able to see what the performance measures are for everyone on their shift. Okay, we can take that away or leave it as it is with your staff. Depends on whether you like them to see the performance measures. Either way, their own individual performance measures will appear on their server checkout. Okay, so they see right away that their server checkout has changed and they know that you're tracking this behavior. Okay, so once we choose that, we're going to get in here to performance measures. And again, we can do the pull down, save, we can create a new one here. Pulling down, we'll see any other ones we've had. These are the typical ones that we set up by default, and these appear as the very, very bottom items on your server checkouts. So they can see on there that you're looking at net sales, net sales per hour, net sales per guest. So that's your guest check averages. Okay. When we do that, just like we looked at with target categories, we can set here what we want our target to be. Okay. So in this case, I'm going to turn it on, make it active by checking this box. That's what makes it appear on their server checkouts, and that we actually want to track. Then we're going to go ahead and here choose that we want to choose a category. So your choices, you're either going to choose it's going to be a category, or we just want to see their gross sales or comparative sales. I want to look at their category sales, and then after I do that, it's going to say, well, what category do you want to look at? So here I could choose their dessert sales. I can choose gift certificate sales. Gift certificate sales are one we especially try to get you to set up and track for your establishments during the holiday season, since we know that as a national average, only 80% of gift certificates or gift cards are ever redeemed. So that's a very obvious 20% return for your staff on a very minimal amount of effort. So if we want to go ahead and drive that forward, we can go ahead and set it up and let them know that we're tracking the gift certificates. Okay. And that means obviously, of course, I created a category called gift certificates, and I put the gift certificate sale item in it, whether it be increments or it lets you enter yourself. If we wanted to set one up where we're looking at straight sales, here I've got one where I chose the pull down here, the black arrow, and it let me choose, did I want to create a new performance measure that was not comparative? Did I want to do straight sales, sales per hour, sales per check? Okay. Straight sales just lets me do my net sales. Other ones here, we can scroll down. We've got some upsales if you're doing quick service at your establishments, if you happen to be doing combos and things like that, those are there. But otherwise on our comparative sales, you're going to go ahead and make the decision which ones do I want to track. Once we look at that on our reports, that side, the reporting section of this, choose the date range that you want. Again, you can choose dates that go back beyond that performance measure because it's going to show you all of your performance measures when you run the report. It's not choosing an individual performance measure and then the dates. So it's going to let you choose back past the beginning of it. What I like to do is if I'm going to be tracking a performance measure, I try to establish a baseline. I usually try to turn that performance measure on and then give myself at least 2 weeks of just having it out there to see who my staff are running with it. Are they really, really, really aggressive in that? Because if I don't do it that long, what I find is that I get a spike. If I only do it for like a couple days before I start a contest or a couple days before I start trying to drive sales in a given direction, I get an artificial baseline because they saw that something new appeared on the bottom of their server checkout. So then they start focusing on it arbitrarily for a little bit. Give it about 2 weeks and then it'll kind of tone back down to what their normal level is. And then we can start using that. If you can let it run for 30 days, even better, it tells you where you're at. And the reason I want to do that is I like to take my 30-day baseline and say that I know my servers only as a whole sell 1% of their tables are getting a dessert. Then the way we can motivate our servers with no expense to us is we can take that number and oftentimes go back to our vendors and our brokers and say, hey, I know it's coming up on, say, the holiday season. It's coming up on Thanksgiving. And I want to do a server contest to increase our dessert sales. You're my broker who sells me my cheesecake. Here's my baseline. Here's what my servers are selling right now. I have a metric for it. This isn't me just being arbitrary. It's not asking me for something. If I can get my servers to increase their sales at least 3 points, would you be willing to give my server with the greatest increase over, say, a free cheesecake to take home for the holidays to their family? Okay. So now you've got a big incentive that's somewhat meaningful to somebody from your staff. You have a motivation for them. There's no cost to you. All you're doing is tracking a metric that's profiting your restaurant. We have a baseline we can use so that we can see which server actually has the greatest increase on it. And then we have a qualifier. So we know that we've got a reason to drive all of our staff members along. And you can do that with your brokers for everything. You can do it for desserts. You can do it with liquor sales. Your liquor vendors will often give you things around it. Don't be afraid to ask your food service distributors, your points of contact. There's money allocated from a lot of your different companies for marketing purposes and sales stuff. They will find it. If they know that it's going to increase the amount of cheesecake that they're moving through an account, especially if you have multiple units and it's a sizable amount, they will find things to incentivize your staff for you and help you increase your add-on sales. So when we run this, right, we're going to get this report. So you can see here I'm looking at my performance measure reports. Again, we've got John here looking at it. and I can see what John's sales were for any given date, what position he was working, and we can see what John had in net sales, because that revenue center was just straight net sales. Okay, but I can also look and see what his net sales were per hour, and I can see what his net sales per guest was. Now, the thing that's going to jump out at you when you start going through their net sales per guest is if you are having your servers, there's several different ways that we can have your restaurant tracking the number of guests that you have. The easiest one is to have every guest count be fulfilled by an entree. So we tell the system which items are entrees, and then every time one of those items is ordered, it counts as a guest. That's the easiest. The most normal way that people do it is every time they sit down at a table and the server opens that table, the server has to enter in how many people are at that table. And they can be set up to do it at the beginning of the meal or at the end of the meal. But they sit down and they say, okay, there's 4 people at that table. The other way we can do it is something called pivot seating, which is only used really primarily in fine dining where actually seats have numbers. If your servers, and this is the typical way, are actually entering in their own guest counts, they are the ones making the decision to tell you how many people are at each table, they can skew this and it will show up drastically on your reports. So your shift managers who work a given shift tend to have a good feel for this is what an 80-person lunch feels like. This is what a 100-person lunch looks like. And if you watch that during the shift, because remember I said these appear across their screen during the shift tools, you're going to be looking to make sure that nobody decided to skew their average by reporting every table only had 1 guest. It will show up because their guest average will skyrocket. So it's just something for your shift managers to keep an eye on that they should be keeping an eye on. We want accurate metrics from our servers if we are allowing them to self-report those things. We want to police it, make sure they're reporting numbers, not just for these metrics here on the server performance, but just in general, because you want to have accurate numbers about your guest traffic. Too high estimates mean that you're going to overschedule staff and they are going to make less revenue because you're overscheduled for it. Too low goes the other way and skews the metrics so that you are underscheduling and stressing them out. So there's incentive for them on all aspects of this to make sure they're accurately reporting, and especially keep an eye on it if you're running a contest that's related or tracking a metric that's related to counts per guest or sales per guest. Okay, so when I look at the bottom of my server checkouts, I said this is what they're going to see. And this is the examples of it. So this is the server's checkout, the bottom end of it. You can see here, as usual, when we look at the server's checkout, the servers have where they sign and turn their money in here, up here, above here, right? Here's their total cash owed value. And as you've probably seen on server checkouts, or perhaps not if you're not on site, the server checkouts have the math displayed on them. So it's transparent for your staff on how we get to these numbers that are on here. So they can see what is being added into the money they've collected, what's being subtracted from it, so that they see how we arrive at this number, okay? Then they have their last chance where they can verify that their tips were entered incorrectly or were entered incorrectly. If I see a 0 in here, I got to make sure that I actually have the credit card receipt for this table with a 0 amount in it, that it wasn't an accident. I just forgot to enter this one, right? Your manager spot check this to make sure this was a 5 and not an 8 and vice versa. And then your servers see this down here at the bottom. They see that we have net sales. So this one looks normal. This is a net sales. We can see what their sales were per hour, and we weren't tracking guest counts with this one. Okay, these are some ones that look skewed for our purposes. So we can see here on this one, right? This wasn't set up correctly. So either we aren't having them enter in guest counts, so we're never going to get a value for that, or we had somewhere in there a category that we were checking against with no items in it. So even though we were trying to check it, there was nothing in that category, so it was reporting 0. In this case, right, we went drastically the other way. So this is what happens when somebody goes ahead and underreports intentionally. So look, their entire sales was all applied against 1 guest. Okay, and then you can see here, this is again a normal baseline when it's set up correctly. So what we get here is their net sales, what their sales were per hour, and then we can see what their check average is per guest. And so generally what we do is we establish a target within this metric, and this is what we look at driving our staff to. And it's also because if we know what our foot traffic is, and if our foot traffic is either steady or growing or decreasing, and we know what our check average is per guest in our establishment or restaurant, then we can go ahead and use that for budgeting in the future as well, because we know how much our revenue is. So then we can do the math to figure out if we know that revenue, Going full circle back to the very beginning of this presentation, we can say, okay, well then in order to meet a 30% goal, I know what labor number I have to be under, and I can go ahead and put the labor into the labor scheduler and make sure that I meet that goal. So that's kind of a full round robin of how we look at using the additional reports in there to start doing forecasting and to start doing labor controls and trying to be proactive and look ahead at incentivizing and changing the trajectory of those numbers. And that's just kind of the next step where people usually jump into after they're done doing their basic sales. Okay, we want it to look like this. Okay. Now, there are a lot of other reporting things. You can see that when we scroll down the reports, there's lots of other reports in there. Typically what happens is we want you to get established using your basic reports for a couple of weeks. We like to go back and look at those numbers with you if you have any question after about 2 weeks of running, so that the numbers that we are looking at and discussing with you are your actual sales information, your numbers, they're meaningful for your locations. And then after that, people will try to start integrating these additional controls and trying to use the point of sale to increase value and revenue in your store and drive your point of sales, as well as to motivate your staff. If you get into additional information situations, then it ties back into how we were discussing on Tuesday with Renee and the hosted solutions through NCR. So if theft is rampant or if you're having guest satisfaction score issues, then there's Aloha tie-ins that allow us to go ahead and drive, both analyze and look for theft issues within your store. There are also products that allow us to go ahead and drive your social media scores up, so that if your customer satisfaction score is high in the thing, we encourage them to post a review. But if it is negative, then we encourage them to give feedback directly to you. It heads it off before it posts on social media. So there's other tools in that. And as you start developing issues within your store, whether they be about sales projection, labor controls, any element basically on your profit and loss statement, if there's something that you need to try to affect and change in that going forward, the point that I want to drive home with this really is Aloha has tools that will help you control and grow or affect your numbers within any category. Even though you've been going just fine for a while and you may not have needed those tools, if you come to a situation where you need those tools and you need to start taking advantage of them, if you don't know where to start, feel free to reach out to us so that we can help you, to point you in the direction of those tools or help you configure the tools that your system is already capable of doing in order for you to get the most value out of those controls, okay? With that, does anybody have any specific questions over stuff I just went over today? Okay, I see. Do you have a question?
No, we don't have any questions.
Okay. If you're enrolled in the third part of this, what we're going to cover on next Tuesday, I'm going to do a similar report to the reports that we were talking about here, but the reports for it is the non-core products. We're going to be looking at some of the core products that are add-ons to Aloha. So Aloha Kitchen Video, and we're going to look at takeout and delivery systems and the reporting that value that you get back from that about your customers and so forth. If you don't have those products and you are not interested in them, it's probably not going to be a lot of fun for you. If you are interested in those products or you just want to know what the control options are and some of those add-on products, you're more than happy to attend, even if you don't have access to those reporting. I just want to make sure nobody was under the illusion that it was going to be about core things on just a basic Aloha installation during the next section. Those are some things that are part of additional packages with the Aloha that are usually for, not every site delivers. So obviously the delivery is an add-on module. Questions or anything I can answer? Anything that's unclear or something that you gives you a thought or question about or that you weren't aware of?
Not really.
Okay. That is
on I see on it lists the dollar amount of voids on our sales report, but it doesn't give us the number making up that dollar amount of void.
Sure. Your payment detail actually has some information regarding the voids too, unless it's not turned on with your system. But we can actually, we can actually go ahead and include that if you want to see the number of voids. Is this Jeff again?
This is Jeff, yes.
Okay, just making sure.
Okay, I'll have to check. I think that's one more. And I also noticed that our past system, it broke out instead of just food sales. We had like buffet and beverage dessert sales. It looks like that may be some type of a subcategory. We may be able to create what you were showing us today.
Yeah, so if you want it to appear on the sales report, there's two different ways we can do that. What we can often do is we can set that up as also what's called a revenue center. And then we define that revenue center as, say, everything that is being rung in under this job code or these items go to that revenue center. If the buffet is an actual item and not a product, then we would set it up and say, okay, every time they hit this buffet button, that puts into a revenue center called buffet. If it always goes through one cash register, then we say everything that went through this cash register is the buffet. Or if it's everything on Sunday between this hour and this hour is buffet, so we just need to define how we want to set that up for you. And then we would probably set it up as a revenue center. If we can't set it up as a revenue center because it's always available, like a salad bar, rather than a buffet proper, then we would go ahead and set those items up in a non-sales category so that they would appear in reporting as a separate group as well.
Because our buffet is probably available 10 to 12 hours a day.
Okay. Does it include any items that are available a la carte as well?
I think soup and salad.
Okay.
Something.
Probably, I know they can buy like the whole buffet or just do a soup and salad. There's probably on some menu items where they have an add-on for soup and salad go with the entree.
Okay. I think what I'm going to do, Jeff, when I reach out to you about your reporting stuff, is I am going to try to schedule an individual call with you after Brian returns to our office, since Brian is on site and he may have some suggestions about how the terminals are being used so that we can set those revenue centers up for you properly.
Okay, and we probably need to get our restaurant vice Chris Rose in on that too, because he'll be much more intelligent on what's actually going on than I will.
Yeah, no, that would be great. And then we can make sure that it's reflecting what you want it to show in your report. Okay. I'm going to go through the reporting stuff. I will reach out to you right after this, Jeff, and we'll schedule a time that we can all be on there and what we're going to cover. And then is there anything else? I'm going to go ahead and let everybody go if there's not something else related to here right now, so we're not holding people. But Jeff, you'll have my attention to kind of beat me to death with questions if you want.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and thank for that. If anybody has anything that they think of after this, feel free to reach out to us here at the office. You can either reach out to me direct here. The email for the office is on there, the email and telephone number, but you can also contact support@integratedpos.com or myself, Bill@integratedpos.com. However, my name is spelled B-I-H-L, so I usually say just support. Okay, well, thank you for that, and I will see everybody who has additional reporting stuff. I will talk to everybody on Tuesday at the same time. And then, Jeff, I'm going to go ahead and send you a message right now after we're done, okay?
Okay, thanks.
No problem. Thanks, everyone.
What's that?